Well, we've come to the culmination of this journey. This is the end of the Gospel of Mark. We will actually revisit Mark along the way, but this is the very end. Although, is it the end? For those of us who've done any study, we know that there's actually three endings to the Gospel of Mark. There are bits that are tacked on. But what we have heard today is generally taken by most scholars to be the actual end, when we get to the end of verse 8. But I can understand why there is a bit of scepticism, because this gospel ends with them being fearful and a sense of, where is all this going? It is not a gospel that is tied up neatly. There are no good ends in the sense of tying it. But let's go back to the start of today's reading. The day has dawned and it is very early. The morning has come. And we see a group of women gathered together, going to anoint the body of Jesus. And there is one thing on their mind. Who will roll away this stone? The journey of discipleship that had started so well back at the beachside in the earliest part of this chapter and in other chapters, where Jesus says, "Come and follow me." And people did come and follow. But where are the men? Where are they in this part of the story at the earliest dawn? Because most of us know about the disciples. We can probably name 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 if we're lucky. But they've scattered. The story of Good Friday is a story of scattering. It seems like the way ahead to discipleship has stopped. Jesus is no longer there. He has been on the cross. He is taken, he is put into the tomb. End of story. Or so we would think. Disciples are nowhere to be seen. Although I have said constantly in the Gospel, and especially in the Gospel of Mark, there is this story of a shadow band of disciples. Do you remember the first ones, the males, who seem to get it wrong all of the time? Who, when Jesus does his teaching, he says to them, "Do you understand?" And they go, "Yeah, we understand," only to be shown moments later for their lack of understanding of what Jesus has taught and has shown. But shadowing is another group, the women. The women who do not forsake Jesus, do not scatter, do not run to the four corners, but they're there. When Jesus is being crucified on the cross, who is there? The women. For them, somehow, they understand. They have it, they've got it, and they continue to follow, even though the body has been taken and put in the tomb. The tomb has been sealed. And yet somehow, despite the problem of this, they are moving on to try to understand what it is. Let us at least make one final gesture by going. Trying to roll away this stone. You see, in life, there are many stones for us that can stop the story of following Jesus in our life, isn't there? Things that happen to us along the way that we can say, it's all too hard. For some of us even, there are deaths. And some people have asked me why I've sort of concentrated on the death side. It's quite a simple reason, because that's what's written in the gospel. You see, before we can understand what it is to have new life, we must understand the concept of death. Death affects us in different ways. Sometimes we are overcome with grief. Sometimes we just don't know how or where to turn. Sometimes when our dreams die, it's too easy to just give up on ourselves and say, it's all too hard. Maybe in this small group of female disciples, there is something that we can grab hold of. That despite of how things may seem, somehow this story of discipleship can continue to move on. Certainly, in the minds of everyone who followed Jesus, the way had been closed. In fact, the tombstone becomes a sense of impenetrable ways forward in this sense of what is discipleship. How can we move on when all this has happened? That's true for us, isn't it, as much as it is for those disciples. But in faith, they go. What incredible faith they must have had to even just hang in there when all else seemed lost. To do what they felt was right. To follow in the only way they knew how. And unlike some of the other Gospels, although I must say the Gospel of Matthew leaves us in some question, because even when Jesus ascends to heaven after being with them for that period of time, it says, some believed, yet some still doubted. So even at the end of other Gospels, there is this sense of where's this all going? But especially in our Gospel today, there is a sense that we are left more with a question than with an answer. We are left with women staring into a tomb in fear and terror. And so I like to view this as they come to this great big tomb that the stone has been rolled away, they look and what do they find? A big lot of nothing. Hardly something to make us want to move on, is it? But in many respects, this tomb is the birthplace of a new way of following. In fact, it becomes the womb of the Christian faith. Out of this, these women are the midwives who will birth a new sense of belief and understanding, and will show that the way is not closed, but the way goes on. This sense of womb is truly a sense of new life. It's not just a story of cadavers walking around for a few days saying good day to all their mates. It actually is inviting us to participate in a new birthing of something new. And that's what we're here today for, to celebrate that. That no matter what stands in our way, there are possibilities of a new way of being. Again, Jesus said, something has to die before something can be born anew. He talks about the grain of wheat. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago when it said that must die in order for new life to come? Today we can celebrate new life because it's for us. And today's story isn't just about resurrection, the resurrection of Jesus. It's actually a story about resurrections. We can participate in the glorious story of resurrections. When our hopes die, when our sense of following seems impenetrable, we can have hope. Because who rolled away the stone? God, maybe? I don't know. But it doesn't just depend upon us. And so many times in Christian faith, it depends on how good I am, or how much I've read the Bible, or how many times I've prayed. This is actually a story about the possibility when we can no longer give truth to that possibility. When we think it's all stopped and it's impossible, something is going on beyond our capacity, beyond our capability, and sometimes even beyond our potential. We too stand with these women today, staring into the tomb and asking, what will this mean for each of us? Where is this going to take us? I want to say there is hope. Often we look at the news, we read the newspaper, and we even see the test captain sort of crying before us, and we think, is there any hope? You know, have you noticed how this has become so much of a national tragedy? I was saying to someone on Thursday, I think it was, how quickly the Prime Minister reacts when someone scuffs up a ball, but when we've got people stuck into detention centres and stuff like that, we certainly don't react that sort of strongly. It's a bit of a worry, isn't it? You know, that it says something about the psyche of our nation, maybe, I don't know. I'll leave that to you to think about and figure, because I'm still thinking about it. But this sense of hope for us should be there despite of what goes on around us. Because we know there are wars, there are rumours of wars, there are kinds of destruction that the earth brings. There is Donald Trump, and there are others, Putin around the world. None of this should distract us from the fact that we are people of hope and people of resurrection. Resurrection is here today for each of us. Because I was looking at our wonderful cross over there, and I was thinking of one of my heroes of faith. It took me a while to actually warm to him, and a guy called Archbishop Romero. Some of you might know of Archbishop Romero, I know. An incredible story of picking someone out who is the most unlikely person to champion his people. He was picked out because they felt he was booky. He was an academic. He wasn't someone who was going to agitate and do things in El Salvador when the government were cracking down. You've been to El Salvador, haven't you, Jeff? Spent some time there. It was a community that had been ripped apart. Things like privilege, things like that had torn people apart. And the people who were in charge were hell-bent to stay in charge. I'm simplifying it here. But they wanted a religious figure who would toe the line. So they found the most unlikely person, Archbishop Romero. Unfortunately, though, he started to talk to some people, some of his priests, Regande, I think his name was, I'm not sure, Rutilio Grande. Yeah, thank you. And he started to hear the stories and started to understand the problems, the difficulties for the people. And he started to speak out. And he wasn't very popular. And he continued to speak out. And so the government decided they would get rid of him in the best way they knew how. In other words, kill him. Dispose of him. And he was asked a few days about what would happen. And he started to talk about resurrections and the story of resurrection. And he said, even if they kill me, I will rise in my people. And when I think of the Christian faith, that's what I see. Even though they kill the one that we call Jesus, the Christ, so too, as he was raised, we will be raised. Raised for the world to see, so that the story continues on, so that the story of discipleship progresses, because we are the continuance of that story, of resurrection, of hope, of life, of liberty, and all of those things. And even though life can have its moments, this is the good news. I struggle with that good news at times myself, of how we live this way. But beyond the greatest of barriers, there is hope, there is life. And today, as we celebrate together, I want us to celebrate hope and life as the people of God in this place, to show justice and mercy with one another, to care for one another, and to uphold one another, so that when we face our own sense of who is going to roll away our stone, that can happen. May you know the blessings of God this Easter, and may we be challenged in our walk of discipleship and faith in all ways. May God bless us. Amen.